Well, coming up, his newest book is literally ripped from the headlines. New York Times bestselling author Joel Rosenberg is here to discuss his latest novel, The Kremlin Conspiracy. That's next. Don't go away. Well, just last week, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared Russia had developed an indefensible nuclear weapon. With one eye on ISIS and the other on North Korea, Putin's warning is concerning, to say the least. New York Times bestselling author Joel Rosenberg is not surprised. Take a look.
Joel Rosenberg has done it again. His newest political thriller, The Kremlin Conspiracy, feels ripped from tomorrow's headlines. With an American president distracted by North Korea and Iran, a czar is rising in Russia with a brazen plan that threatens NATO and could draw the U.S. into nuclear war. The Kremlin Conspiracy, from New York Times bestselling author Joel C. Rosenberg.
Joel's with us now, and I tell you, your timing is uncanny. How did you come up with the concept, and how did you meet this headline?
Right. Well, look, as you know, Gordon, I've been writing about the threat of radical Islam, and I've been doing it through novels to try to drive that into the popular culture, the understanding. I've been doing that for almost 17 years, and I just needed a professional, reshuffling of the deck. Radical Islam is evil, but it's not the only evil in the world, as we see in North Korea and elsewhere. So I was looking for a new threat to write about, a worst-case scenario, and my eye kept being drawn back to Vladimir Putin. Now, as you know, I'm Jewish on my father's side, and my father's family were Orthodox Jews that escaped out of Russia in the early years of the 1900s when Tsar Nicholas II was in power.
Yeah, the pogrom.
Yeah, 60,000 Jewish people murdered, many raped, beaten, tortured. It was horrible. We got out by God's grace. But ever since, part of our heritage, part of our DNA, I would say, is to keep an eye on the evil of the czars in the Kremlin. So I see in Putin someone who, though he was born and raised in the Soviet era, the communist era, while he was an operative in the KGB and eventually rose to the head of the modern KGB, known as the FSB, he's not a communist at heart. He is, I think he sees himself as a czar, someone trying to rebuild and expand the imperialist power of Russia. He feels humiliated by the collapse of the Soviet Union. He says it's the worst geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Now, you and I could pick a few others, like the Holocaust, World War II itself, Cambodia, Rwanda. That someone thinks the collapse of the Eagle Empire is
the greatest liberation of the century.
Absolutely, it was. But
where you have a system that's failed and it needed to collapse, and their freedom needed to come. It's a window into his soul.
That he thinks that this is a disaster and that he needs to rebuild the glory of Mother Russia. So with that premise, I began to ask myself, all right, let's imagine a worst-case scenario for Putin. Now, I'm not going to call him Putin in the book. I'm going to take liberties. I'm going to make it a fictional character. He's not Putin, but Gordon, he's Putin-esque, right? There are elements of him that are consistent, but this allows me to create somebody and try to imagine where might they go next.
Well, it's interesting you point out Tsar, because the root of that, like Kaiser, is Caesar.
Yes.
And that is the root from which it's all springing. And in the Christian persecution of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century, Caesar had to be worshipped as God, and that was the test. If you refused to worship Caesar as a god, you would be put to death, and the Christians couldn't do it. They would say, there's only one Lord, and his name is Jesus.
And this is what concerns me about Putin. It's not just that he's a threat to the NATO alliance in Europe. It's not just that he's a threat to Israel and others as he moves into Syria, working with Assad and the Iranians to slaughter hundreds of thousands of people and create a new Russian foothold in the Middle East. He's not just a threat to the United States with that terrible, most aggressive speech last week that he's given in 17 years. It just happens to be on the eve of my novel. I talk about collusion. I should be colluding. I mean, he's set up exactly what I'm trying to talk about with the Kremlin conspiracy. But there's more. 18 months ago, as you know, he outlawed the sharing of the gospel in Russia. You can no longer invite someone even to your home and share the gospel.
He did it with the support, oddly, of the Orthodox Church.
That's right. That's right. You can't invite someone to church. You can't email to someone to ask them to come. And you certainly can't have big evangelistic campaigns like Billy Graham, God bless him, did when God opened the door to the communist world for the gospel through Billy Graham.
Yeah. And so through Gorbachev.
Exactly. So we're at a moment where Vladimir Putin is not just a threat. He is much more dangerous than radical Islam. He has 7,000 nuclear warheads, and he's at war with the gospel. This is not a good combination. He's invaded Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, and he occupies 20%. He invaded southern Ukraine, and he occupies and now owns Crimea. He invaded eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region. He holds it still. And of course, Syria. The question is, where is he going next? And in this novel, I imagine a fictional Russian leader trying to do a lightning fast grab of one or two or three of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Why? Yeah, these are NATO allies.
I would say Ukraine.
Well, but okay, he's already done that. But I think the question is, he may try to grab Ukraine, but what would be the reason to go grab a NATO country? The reason would be the gamble that in the end, the United States and NATO would not use military force. Right. And suddenly, if we did not, that's the end of NATO. And now the tyrant in Moscow suddenly is the most powerful man in the world. No one's standing up to him. He has nuclear weapons. He has ballistic missiles. And he would be sitting on top all the power in the world. That's the theory of the worst case scenario in the Kremlin conspiracy.
Do you see this rising not just in Russia, but are you concerned at all about what's recently happened with China, where they've gotten rid of term limits for the leader?
Right.
I thought what in the last century was called the cult of personality had been completely debunked, and they were going to election processes and let's have a regular changeover in leadership so we don't get into that. Right. But now the world seems to be completely turning the other way. That's right. Are we getting set up for dictators once again?
We are, and I think that's, you have that in North Korea, you have it in China, you have it in Russia. Look, China and North Korea are serious threats. I think China is a little bit longer term threat. What they're doing in the South China Seas is very, very dangerous. North Korea, of course, the leader is crazy, so anything could happen there. That's my next book. Literally, I'm writing it now. But right now, I think that the United States is so focused on China, North Korea, ISIS, Al Qaeda, and those are serious. I feel like Washington and Brussels it's as though they're not really taking seriously the Putin threat. And in fact, Putin's speech that was so aggressive last week, that's what he says. He said, he says, the world is not listening to me. And he says, you listen to me now. I am not bluffing. I feel like that for all his bravado, for all of his invasions of other countries, his knocking off opponents, or at least they just disappear, for all that he's done.
Assassination.
Yeah, exactly. It's just this morning, it seems to be, or yesterday. For all that, he feels like he's still not getting people's attention, and he seems to want it. And that is a dangerous place to be.
Well, as Christian, what should we do? In the book, you have your hero have a moral dilemma. You're facing genocide.
Right.
And you have an opportunity to take out the dictator.
I say Marcus Ryker is a former Marine in the book. He's a former U.S. Secret Service agent. Everything he learned to protect our president will he now use to take out theirs.
Sort of the Bonhoeffer question.
It's a Bonhoeffer question. If you could take out Hitler, is that the right thing to do? We're not there yet. Two things. First, we need to be praying for the people of Russia. For the church in Russia. We need to not forget that war is not our first option. What we want is prayer, that God can change things. We need to pray for Putin. God says to pray for our enemies and for those who persecute us. So that would be him. God could change him, or he could remove him. I pray both. Lord, save him and remove him. But we also need to be praying for our leaders in Washington, particularly President Trump, who has a curious and I would say an unsettling relationship, and I don't mean personal, but I mean policy relationship with Putin. He set aside the issues of whether there's corruption or criminality. I hope not. I think probably not, but that'll be figured out later. The issue is he's definitely Trump is driving NATO to spend more money on defense. Good. He's spending more money on defense for the United States. That's good. He's got a great team around him, and those that weren't great, they tend to leave. That's good. But he will not say a tough word against Putin at all. He'll take shots at Rocket Man in North Korea. Jeff Sessions gets tougher language as the Attorney General than Vladimir Putin. Why? I'm not going to jump to some conclusion that it's criminal or corrupt, but it's unsettling when you have a leader as dangerous as Vladimir Putin, an American president that doesn't seem to. He actually hasn't even responded to the Putin speech. I don't understand it. I'm not going to try to speculate, but it's a concern.
You let the Pentagon do it, but anyway, you've raised a lot of interesting moral questions, and I think as Christians, what do we do? And we need to keep in mind, if the early church could pray for the Caesars that were persecuting them, how much more should we be praying? And praying for the Christians in Russia, praying for Russian leadership, Chinese leadership, on our own leadership. We need wisdom now more than ever. Well, Joel's book is called The Kremlin Conspiracy. You can find it wherever books are sold. And thanks again for being with us.
Great to be with you, Gordon. Thank you.
Terry, over to you.